"Ma'am, your blatant disregard for the rules of this institution suggests a fundamental lack of discipline," Judge Marcus Thorne said, his voice echoing with the self-assured resonance of a man who had not been questioned in decades. He peered down from the bench, his glasses perched on the end of his nose, a disappointed patriarch scolding a wayward child. It speaks to a certain cowardice, a refusal to face the consequences of one's own actions. Allison Kelly stood motionless at the defendant's table. Her long blonde hair was tied back in a simple, functional knot, and the plain red top she wore was a stark splash of color in the muted, wood-paneled courtroom. She didn't fidget. She didn't protest. Her hands rested calmly on the table in front of her, her posture a study in stillness. Her gaze remained fixed on the judge, not with defiance, but with a quiet, unnerving neutrality. She was listening, processing his words as if they were data points in a complex equation. The judge, accustomed to fluster and fear, took her composure as insolence. His jaw tightened. He saw a young, disrespectful woman, and his judgment was swift and absolute. The charge was a simple one, a series of unpaid parking tickets that had escalated to a court summons. It was a bureaucratic oversight, a product of a life lived in transition between a former, more chaotic existence and a new, quieter one. But for Judge Thorne, it was a symptom of a generational disease. He was a man who believed in order, in the clear lines of authority he had known during his own brief peacetime military service in the 70s. He saw Allison's youth, her civilian attire, and built an entire narrative of entitlement and disrespect. "In my day," he continued, leaning into the microphone, "we understood what it meant to stand accountable. We understood duty. We understood that every action, no matter how small, has a consequence. You stand there, silent, as if this is all a great inconvenience to you, as if the laws that govern the rest of us do not apply to you. Is that it, Miss Kelly? Do you believe you are above it all?" A lawyer from the city attorney's office shuffled his papers, looking uncomfortable. The bailiff, a burly man with a placid expression, shifted his weight from one foot to the other. The air in the courtroom was thick and still, smelling of old paper and furniture polish. Allison took a slow, deliberate breath. "No, Your Honor," she said. Her voice was steady, lower than one might expect, and carried a natural clarity that cut through the room's oppressive silence. "No? Then explain yourself," the judge pressed. "Why should this court show you leniency when you have shown it nothing but contempt? You ignore multiple citations. You ignore a summons until a bench warrant is issued. This is not the behavior of a responsible citizen. It is the behavior of someone who runs from their obligations. I have been traveling, Your Honor. There was a mix-up with my mail forwarding," she explained, offering no further detail. The judge scoffed, a dry, rasping sound. "Traveling? Of course. A vacation, was it? Seeing the world on your parents' dime, I imagine? The world does not pause for our leisure, Miss Kelly. Responsibility is a full-time occupation." He was a master of the slow, methodical dissection, using his position to peel back layers of a person's dignity until they were raw and exposed. He had done it 1,000 times. He would look for a weakness, a tremor in the voice, a flicker of fear in the eyes, and he would press on it relentlessly. But with Allison, he found nothing. It was like pressing against solid granite. Her calm was a mirror, reflecting his own escalating frustration back at him. It infuriated him. "I require a character reference," Judge Thorne declared, changing tactics. "Before I determine your sentence, which I assure you will be the maximum allowed, I want to hear from someone who can attest to your standing in the community. A boss, a pastor. Someone who can convince me that you are not the feckless, cowardly individual you appear to be." He leaned back, crossing his arms. The trap was set. A young woman with a transient history, as he perceived it, would have no such person on hand. It would be his final checkmating move. The silence stretched. Allison's eyes did not leave his. The judge's words, particularly his use of cowardly, seemed to hang in the air between them. For the first time, a shadow of something unreadable passed through her expression. It wasn't anger. It was something closer to memory. As the judge continued his lecture, his voice began to fade into a low drone for Allison. The word cowardice had hooked into something deep inside her. He spoke of bravery, of facing pressure, of men who stood tall in the face of adversity. His words triggered a flicker, a momentary disconnect from the sterile courtroom. Her gaze drifted, unfocused, toward the large, drafty window. The scar was small, a thin white line just at her hairline, almost perfectly hidden by her blonde hair unless you knew exactly where to look. It was a relic of a different kind of pressure. The scent of wood polish and old books was suddenly replaced by the coppery smell of blood and the acrid tang of burnt cordite. The gentle hum of the courtroom's ventilation vanished, overwhelmed by the deafening percussive roar of a HH-60 Pavehawk helicopter's rotor blades beating the air into submission. She felt the phantom weight of body armor on her shoulders, the familiar heft of a rifle in her hands, the grit of sand between her teeth. The memory was a flash, not a narrative. The chaotic emerald green world as seen through night vision goggles, the urgent, shouted commands of her team, distorted by the internal comm system, the specific gut-wrenching lurch of the helicopter as it flared for a landing in a narrow, contested valley, enemy fire pinging off the fuselage like angry hornets. She felt the strain in her arms and back as she hauled a wounded pararescueman, a man twice her size, away from the burning wreckage of a downed Apache. Dust and debris, kicked up by the rotor wash, stung her face. That was where the shrapnel had kissed her, a glancing blow that had knocked her sideways but not down. Down was not an option. The judge's voice talking about consequences was a meaningless whisper compared to the consequences of a single second of hesitation in that valley. The memory dissolved as quickly as it came, leaving a faint ache behind the scar and an unshakable calm in its wake. What was this, compared to that? Back in the courtroom, in the back row, sat a man named Sergeant Frank Miller, retired. He wore a simple ball cap with a faded U.S. Air Force logo on it. He'd come to court to support his nephew on a minor traffic charge, and had stayed, intrigued by the quiet drama unfolding. He had spent 25 years as an aircraft maintenance chief, and he knew the look of a soldier. It wasn't in the clothes or the haircut, it was in the bones. It was in the way a person stood, the way they absorbed pressure without bending. He saw it in the young woman with the blonde hair. Judge Thorne saw a spoiled kid. Frank Miller saw a coiled spring. When the judge demanded a character witness, Frank watched the woman closely. He saw her resolve harden. "Your Honor," Allison said, her voice cutting through the judge's tirade, "with all due respect, you have no idea who I am or what I have done." "Then enlighten me, Miss Kelly," the judge boomed. "Who are you?" Allison hesitated, not from uncertainty, but as if weighing the cost of her next words. "I served," she said simply. "My character was tested, and it was found sufficient." The judge laughed, a short, ugly bark. "Served? Everyone's a veteran these days. Flipping burgers at the mess hall doesn't make you a hero, young lady. What was your unit? Public affairs? Supply clerk?" She looked him in the eye. "I was a combat rescue officer with the 24th Special Tactics Squadron." A ripple went through the gallery. The name was obscure to most, but not to everyone. In the back row, Frank Miller sat bolt upright. The 24th STS, the tip of the spear, the elite of the elite. His breath caught in his chest. A woman, a combat rescue officer. It was rare but not unheard of, and the ones who made it through that pipeline were legends. The judge, however, was unimpressed. "Alphabet soup, it means nothing to me. Your service, whatever it was, does not grant you a pass on civilian responsibility." Frank Miller didn't wait to hear more. He knew what he had to do. He rose quietly from the bench, his old knees protesting, and slipped out of the heavy courtroom doors into the hallway. The sudden quiet was a relief. He fumbled for his phone, his thick fingers scrolling through a long list of contacts until he found the one he was looking for. It was a number he hadn't called in years, a direct line to a man now a full colonel at Hurlburt Field. The phone was answered on the second ring. "Colonel Evans." "Sir, it's Frank Miller." "Sorry to bother you, sir." "Frank, it's been a while. Everything all right?" The voice on the other end was warm but professional. "I'm fine, sir. But I'm at the county courthouse in Northwood. There's a situation here. There's a young woman, a veteran, getting torn to shreds by a Judge Thorne. He's calling her a coward, threatening her with jail time over some parking tickets. I get calls like this every week, Frank. Is there something special about this one?" Frank took a deep breath. "She just gave her unit, the 24th STS. She said she was a CRO. Sir, she's calm as a rock. I think it might be Valkyrie 1. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute, a sudden void of sound that was more eloquent than any words. For a full 5 seconds, nothing. Then Colonel Evans' voice came back, and all the warmth was gone. It was replaced by something cold, hard, and incredibly dangerous. "Stay where you are, Frank." "What courtroom?" "Courtroom 4B, sir. I'm on my way." The line went dead. Frank leaned against the wall, the phone still in his hand, and let out a shaky breath. The cavalry, as they used to say, was coming. Colonel David Evans slammed the phone down onto its cradle, the plastic cracking under the force. His aide, a young first lieutenant, looked up from his desk, startled. "Sir, get me everything you have on a Captain Allison Kelly, last attached to the 24th. Call sign Valkyrie 1. Evans snapped, his voice a low growl. He was already shrugging on his service coat, his movements sharp and economical. And I mean everything. Now, the lieutenant's fingers flew across the keyboard. He was young, but he knew the legends. Every special tactics operator knew the name Valkyrie. It was a ghost story told around bonfires, a name spoken with a mixture of awe and reverence. A name that meant help was coming, when God himself had given up on you. The secure personnel file flashed onto the screen. The lieutenant's eyes widened. He stood up from his chair as if it were electrified. My God, sir. Evans strode around the desk to look. The screen was a constellation of heroism. Allison Kelly's official photograph showed a much younger woman, her blonde hair pulled into a severe military bun, her face serious, her eyes holding an intensity that the courtroom camera couldn't capture. But it was the columns of text beside it that stole the breath. Decoration. Air Force Cross. Citation. For extraordinary heroism in military operations against an armed enemy. Captain Kelly, as combat rescue officer, led a 3-man para-rescue team into a heavily contested enemy stronghold in the Kunar Valley to recover the crew of a downed F-15E. Under continuous rocket-propelled grenade and machine gun fire for over 3 hours, she personally shielded the wounded co-pilot with her own body while directing close air support. Decoration. Silver Star, 1st Oak Leaf Cluster. Citation. With complete disregard for her own safety, Captain Kelly rappelled from a hovering pavehawk into a minefield to render aid to a critically wounded Army Ranger. Decoration. Purple Heart, 2nd Oak Leaf Cluster. The list went on. Medals for valor, for meritorious service, for wounds received in action. Mission logs detailed dozens of high-risk rescue operations in Afghanistan and Iraq. It was the service record of a warrior, one of the most decorated operators of her generation. Get the command chief, Evans ordered, his voice tight with controlled fury. And get a staff car to the front of the building in 2 minutes. We're going to the Northwood County Courthouse. He looked at the screen one last time, at the face of the young woman Judge Thorne had called a coward. And God help that judge when we get there. Back in courtroom 4B, Judge Thorne was delivering his final self-satisfied verdict. He was oblivious to the storm gathering outside his small kingdom. He had won. The silent young woman had offered no defense he considered valid, no witness to vouch for her. He would make her his example for the day. My cortical of Mr. Vorkin 4B, Miss Komshida, R. Kaminetik, Kelly. This court has given you every opportunity to show remorse, to demonstrate respect for the law, he pontificated, savoring the moment. You have done neither. Your silence, which you seem to mistake for strength, is nothing more than thinly veiled contempt. In this room, the law is the ultimate authority, and I am its instrument. I find your character to be profoundly lacking in the virtues of honesty and civic duty. He paused for dramatic effect. Letting his words hang in the silent room, Allison simply watched him, her expression unchanging. Therefore, he declared, his voice rising, I find you in contempt of this court. I am sentencing you to 48 hours in the county jail. Perhaps a weekend spent contemplating the inside of a cell will impress upon you the importance of respect and the cowardice of evasion. Bailiff, take the prisoner into custody. The bailiff moved forward reluctantly. He placed a hand gently on Allison's arm. She didn't resist. She simply turned, ready to comply, a soldier following an order, no matter how nonsensical. It was at that exact moment that the great oak doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. They didn't fly open, they were pushed with a firm, deliberate force that announced an arrival of significance. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. Every head turned. Framed in the doorway stood 4 figures in the immaculate blue dress uniforms of the United States Air Force. In the lead was Colonel David Evans, his chest a solid block of colorful ribbons, the silver eagle on his shoulders gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Beside him was a Command Chief Master Sergeant, a man whose stern face looked like it was carved from oak. Flanking them were 2 other officers, a male lieutenant colonel and a female major, both with the same ramrod posture and unblinking gaze. They moved as one, striding down the central aisle with a purpose that seemed to suck the very air out of the room. The rhythmic squeak of their polished dress shoes on the linoleum floor was the only sound. The judge, mid-sentence, froze, his mouth slightly agape. The city attorney's jaw dropped. The bailiff instinctively removed his hand from Allison's arm and took a step back. The 4 officers didn't stop until they reached the defendant's table. Colonel Evans walked directly to Allison Kelly, his eyes ignoring everyone else in the room. He halted precisely 2 feet in front of her, his body snapping to a perfect rigid position of attention. Then, in a movement so sharp and clean it seemed to cut the air, he raised his right hand to his brow in a flawless salute. Captain Kelly, his voice rang out, filled with a respect so profound it was almost a physical force. My sincere apologies for the interruption and for our delay. We came as soon as we heard. Allison looked at him, and for the first time a flicker of emotion crossed her face, a deep, bone-weary relief. She returned the salute with a nod, a small economical gesture that was more than enough. Colonel Evans held the salute for a moment longer before dropping his hand. He then turned his head slowly, deliberately, to face the bench. His eyes, cold and hard as chips of flint, locked onto Judge Thorne. "Your Honor," he began, his voice dangerously calm. "My name is Colonel David Evans, United States Air Force. It seems you are under a grave misapprehension, and I am here to correct it. You have a genuine American hero in your courtroom, and you have been addressing her with a level of disrespect that I find frankly sickening." The judge, flustered and crimson-faced, stammered, "Now see here, Colonel, this is a court of law. Your rank means nothing in here. My rank means that I am the commanding officer of the woman whose character you have so arrogantly and so publicly maligned." Evans shot back, his voice rising in volume and intensity. "The woman you just called a coward is Captain Allison Kelly. To those of us in the special operations community, she is better known by her call sign Valkyrie 1. He took a step toward the bench. The name Valkyrie is whispered with reverence by every pilot who has ever flown a combat sortie over hostile territory, because they knew that if their aircraft went down, she was the one coming to get them. Let me tell you about this coward." Evans's voice filled the courtroom, each word a hammer blow against the judge's authority. "This coward holds the Air Force Cross, our nation's second highest award for valor, for her actions during a rescue mission in the Kunar Valley. She and her team were on the ground for 3 hours, under constant direct enemy fire, recovering the crew of a downed Strike Eagle. She used her own body to shield a wounded pilot from shrapnel, while directing airstrikes on enemy positions less than 50 meters from her own." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. The entire courtroom was frozen, captivated. "She holds 2 silver stars for gallantry. One was earned when she performed a battlefield medical procedure on a wounded soldier while simultaneously returning fire on an enemy machine gun nest. She has been wounded in combat on 3 separate occasions, earning 3 Purple Hearts, and refused to be evacuated until every one of her team members was safe. Her teams are credited with saving the lives of over 70 American and coalition service members. Men are alive today with their wives and their children because this woman refused to back down, refused to fail, and walked through fire to bring them home." The colonel turned to look at Allison, his expression softening for a fraction of a second. Then he faced the judge again, his eyes blazing. "You sit up there in your robes in this safe and quiet room, and you dare to lecture her on courage. You, who have likely never faced a consequence more severe than a lost legal argument, presume to judge her character. You have made a mockery of your position, and of the very concept of justice." The rebuke was complete, the humiliation total. Judge Thorne sat shrunken in his high-backed chair, the color drained from his face, his mouth opening and closing silently like a fish. The bailiff stared at Allison with a newfound look of awe. In the back, Frank Miller wiped a tear from his eye, a proud, sad smile on his face. The colonel's gaze swept the room. This woman's character is beyond reproach. It has been forged in chaos, tested by fire, and proven time and again when everything was on the line. He turned back to Allison. The other officers stood at attention behind him. It was a silent, powerful honor guard. It was then that Allison spoke, her voice not aimed at the judge but at the entire room, a quiet lesson in the wake of the storm. "The standards are the standards," she said, her voice clear and steady. "They're supposed to be hard. They're supposed to be high. But they have to be applied fairly, to everyone. That's all any of us ask for." Her simple words were a final, devastating indictment of the judge's bias. She wasn't asking for an exception. She was asking for the fairness she had been denied. She was asking him to see the person, not the prejudice. As she spoke of standards, of the unyielding line one must hold to, another memory surfaced, brief and sharp. It wasn't a maelstrom of combat, but a quiet moment of creation. She was a young lieutenant, fresh from the grueling combat rescue officer course, standing in a briefing room. Her commander, a grizzled, no-nonsense colonel, pointed at her name on a roster for an upcoming deployment. "Your lead for this team, Kelly," he'd said, his eyes boring into her. "They'll need a Valkyrie out there, not a lieutenant. What do you want your call sign to be?" She had met his gaze without flinching. "Valkyrie will do just fine, sir." The commander had nodded, a rare hint of a smile touching his lips. "Good. Go bring our people home." In that moment, Allison Kelly had ceased to exist, and Valkyrie 1 was born. Forged not by a single act of heroism but by the quiet acceptance of an immense and sacred duty. The contempt charge was of course immediately and unceremoniously dropped. The parking tickets were paid on the spot by the command chief, who pulled a wad of cash from his pocket and slapped it on the clerk's desk with a glare that dared anyone to object. Colonel Evans formally escorted Captain Kelly from the courtroom, the other officers falling in behind them, leaving Judge Thorne utterly defeated and alone on his bench. The fallout was swift. An official inquiry was launched by the State Judicial Review Board. Judge Thorne was strongly encouraged to take an early retirement, which he did within the month. The incident, which became a quiet local legend, prompted the county to implement a mandatory veteran awareness and sensitivity training program for all courthouse staff, a program championed and partially designed by a very proud retired Air Force sergeant named Frank Miller. A few weeks later, Allison sat in a quiet corner of the local VFW post, a glass of ice water in front of her. She didn't come here often, but sometimes the quiet camaraderie was a comfort. The door opened, and a stooped older man walked in, looking uncertain. It was Marcus Thorne, stripped of his robes and his judicial authority. He looked smaller, frailer. He saw her and walked over, his steps hesitant. He stood before her table, holding a hat in his hands. "Captain Kelly," he said, his voice barely a whisper. I came to apologize. What I did, what I said, there is no excuse. I was arrogant, I was ignorant, and I was profoundly wrong." Allison looked up at him. There was no anger in her eyes, only a deep, assessing calm. She had faced down armed men who wanted to kill her. A humbled old man posed no threat. She gave a slow, deliberate nod. "We all have blind spots, Judge," she said, her voice gentle. "The important thing isn't that you have them, it's what you do after you're forced to see them." He nodded, seeming to absorb her words. "Thank you, Captain." He turned and left without another word. Allison watched him go, then took a slow sip of her water. The battle was over. The standard had been upheld. And maybe, just maybe, a small measure of wisdom had been gained by all. To see more stories that honor the courage and quiet professionalism of our women in uniform, like this video, subscribe to She Chose Valor and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Your support helps us ensure these vital stories are never forgotten.